we are going to list our top movies that need a remake. Now, I find this an interesting topic, and I hope a few of you do too. Because to me, whenever I see lists about movies that need a remake, it's movies that people really liked. And I say, yes, so why do you want them to be remade?
Lion King wasn't good enough, so they had to make it with
one of the
CG
greatest
lions.
animated movies of all time.
Aladdin was a terrible movie, therefore, let's make it with Will Smith.
Right. So if you look up, go Google lists of movies that need to be remade, and they're all movies that absolutely should never be touched. Princess Bride, I mean, don't remake it. Like, don't remake that movie. But
The Never-Ending Story.
That's on my list.
yeah, Never Ending Story, don't touch it. Just don't mess with.
Why wouldn't you touch that movie?
You can make your case in a second. You can make your case in a second, Emma. But I feel that the real movies that need to be remade are the ones that had a ton of potential, great concept, or maybe a great property, and then boom. And the problem is when you have a movie that does terribly or isn't executed well, Hollywood won't touch it for 20 years, and you have to wait. You know, some time has to go by. So I've got a few good ones. I picked like 10. Dan told me to only pick 3, so I picked 10. Oh. But I'll do 3 and then some honorable mentions.
Okay.
Yeah, I did 3.
Yeah.
I have a few extras though. So.
Yeah.
How many did you do, Emma?
I have 3 because one of them is now eliminated based on your whole spiel.
No, you can do.
I'm still gonna say that.
No, you do it. He was just mocking you. So Emma's going to go first and give us her movie that needs to be remade.
Okay, I think The Never-Ending Story could be remade because even though people enjoyed it as a kid, it's not something that you can watch now. Like you can't get through it now because of the weird dragon dog and the special effects that are just really cheesy. And so I think if it was made now, it would just be, you could continuously watch it in the future. And if it was made I don't know, better.
Do you think, though, that some of the low special effects are like part of the charm of some of those classics?
Maybe for like The Labyrinth, I think it works still. And I could still watch it now, but I can't watch The Never-Ending Story now.
My number 1 is The Hobbit Trilogy. And this to me was one of the biggest cinematic disappointments because the potential of a 2 to 3 hour film telling the story of the Hobbit, and I'll grant maybe a 2-part. I don't even like doing a 2-part. But if you want to do a long movie, a 3-hour movie, 3.5-hour movie, the story of Bilbo Baggins, self-contained, you can watch it with your kids in that universe with the same feel as Peter Jackson's universe, I would love that. And I was so excited when it was announced.
Yeah.
And I didn't even see any of them in the theaters because it just immediately was obvious to me.
I've never seen the third movie. I never finished it.
Not worth watching. Not worth watching.
What ruined it for you? Because I think part of the charm of the original is that it's more practical than it is CGI. And they really got into 3D movies.
Well,
and they thought that was going to be big.
One of the biggest things about it was, well, I mean, there was the whole weird 48 frames thing that I don't know why he decided to do that. But
I saw that in Sam's Club. It was playing on one of the big TVs, and I was like, this looks like a soap opera. Like, why? Why are they doing this?
But also, I kind of blame the studio for this, and I think Peter Jackson himself was moderately disenfranchised by this decision. I could be wrong. But the fact that they were like, this is literally a money printer. And so they decided to make 6 pages an entire movie, a 3-hour movie. Just expounding upon it far more than it needed to.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if I said this on podcast before, but a few years ago I was doing a reread of The Hobbit, and I was like, oh, it might be fun to play the soundtrack while reading it. I was literally reading the story faster than the soundtrack. And I was having to skip forward in the soundtrack to be at the same part I was in the book. And I literally read the book faster than the soundtrack.
It's a 250 to 300 page little kid's book you can sit down and read in one sitting.
Yep.
And it was 3 movies. It was 10 hours long.
Yep.
No. I agree with the CGI comment. The physics, it feels like a cartoon world. When by the time they get to the goblin hole and they're like falling and surfing down falling bridges, and you're like, oh, okay, so these people can't die. So why do I care?
All right. How many are we doing?
That was my first, and she's doing. Well, I think we're trying to list 3, and then I'll rattle off some honorable.
Then I will start with a completely obscure pick that I don't think any of you will get, and that is The Pirates of Penzance. It's a Gilbert and Sullivan classic musical that is witty, it's brilliant, inspired a lot of Animaniac songs, fantastic music, and it's absolutely hilarious. The 1983 version with Kevin Kline, Angela Lansbury, and Rex Smith is the best version to date, and it is terrible. I mean, it's very good, but it's also like very poorly done. And they were playing with this release model where they released it on video at the same time as theaters. 1983. I don't know what they were thinking back then, but it bombed. It looks like a glorified high school stage production visually, but that
And I feel like musicals are making a comeback in the theaters. You feel like that would be something that they would do.
But here's another note for Hollywood. Stop casting non-singers in musicals. Just stop it.
I like Hugh Jackman and Zac Efron.
Number 2 is A Wrinkle in Time. It was done in 2018, surprisingly, and I didn't even know about it. But
The book is so good.
Yeah, I remember liking the book a lot as a kid, and when I saw the trailer, it just didn't really match any of the characters that I had envisioned.
You didn't picture Oprah Winfrey when you read the book?
I pictured someone weird and quirky, and I don't
think... Wasn't Oprah in it? Am I making that up?
Oprah was definitely in it, and it took $100 million to make it, and it only made $30 million.
Total.
But I bet you that half that, like $50 million, went to Oprah being in it.
Yeah.
That's such a disaster. And it's so sad. And it has such strong Christian themes in the original book that they just ripped out.
So I've got thoughts on that.
Oh, go ahead.
So I do love Wrinkle in Time. It's always going to be one of my top 30 books, stories. Very fond memories of it in my childhood. I did read it again a few years ago. And yeah, I used to think Madeleine L'Engle had stalwart Christian principles written into her books. She's kind of a universalist.
She is, but I don't know at the time if she was.
Wrinkle in Time was universalist.
You think so?
Wrinkle in Time mentions, so when they're talking about kind of the pathways to heaven, the enlightenment, essentially, she mentions
I do remember that, yeah.
Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad. Maybe not Muhammad, but Gandhi, I think.
I guess it's relative because if I'm reading that as Christian fiction, then I'm like, oh, this is heresy. Right. If I'm reading it as a secular book and I'm like, oh, there's kind of a bit of a Christian theme.
It's a brilliant story, right. A great start to a series that quickly went downhill.
I felt like there was some predestination themes.
Once we got to the Noah book with the little elephants, I was not into it.
Not into it. Okay. All right. My number 2 is John Carter. This was a Disney movie that came out like 2008-ish, and it was an adaptation of the old books by Edgar Rice Burroughs, which were just fantastic sci-fi books. It's essentially Superman on Mars, and they're wonderful. And I think the first 5 books are totally worth reading. And the title of the sci-fi books, the Pulp Fiction books, is A Princess of Mars. And which is the first book is called The Princess of Mars, and eventually it became called the John Carter of Mars series or the Princess of Mars series. And that's a great evocative title, A Princess of Mars. And you're like, oh, what does that mean? They changed the name of the movie to John Carter of Mars because they felt nobody wanted to go see a movie with princess in the title.
Why would you?
And then they had test audiences or whatever, and they said, Mars, sci-fi isn't in right now. Let's rename it John Carter. And if you hear the name John Carter and you don't know what John Carter of Mars is, you're going to go, I don't want to go see a movie about a random guy named John.
Yeah.
The movie itself was okay.
Is it Channing Tatum?
I don't even remember. The guy disappeared from Hollywood, I think.
Oh, okay. Someone else.
Yeah, it was someone else. But anyway, the movie was okay. They could have done better, and it was kind of that weird, awkward era where they were just getting into realistic CGI.
I'm thinking of Jupiter, whatever.
Maybe 2005.
Sorry. Right.
No, you're thinking Jupiter Ascending.
Yeah, that was Channing Tatum.
That one was okay. Anyway. John Carter, I would love to see a good adaptation of the Pulp series.
My number 2 is Venom. So Spider-Man 3 was on the horizon. Little old me, huge Spider-Man fan, and the greatest character. And the funny thing is, I was never into villains as a kid. Like, I know a lot of people now just love all the villains in various franchises. And I was always, no, you vote for you root for the good guy, always. The good guy's always, the bad guys are bad, good guys are good. However, Venom, I loved Venom. I always loved Venom. And so when I saw that Venom was going to make his way into Spider-Man 3, I was elated. And my disappointment for my disappointment for that movie sent me into this emo spiral. I attended
Spider-Man
jazz
3?
clubs and just danced.
Of the original Spider-Man 3? Or
Of the
Venom,
Tobey Maguire's, yes.
Okay.
And then The Venom movie
There's
was
only one
announced.
Spider-Man 3.
And then the Venom movie was announced. And at this point, I had zero hope. I had no hope.
There's only one movie called
And
Spider-Man 3.
I did
Okay.
not. Yeah, I watched it. I watched it entirely dispassionately. And then they teased Let There Be Carnage. And I was like, no, please no. Let it stop. Let Sony not ruin Carnage as well.
Okay, well, I'm going to say The Hunger Games, and then I have some honorable mentions.
Yeah, we'll rattle off honorable
But
mentions after.
yeah,
So,
I love
interesting.
the
I love the
books.
movies. So
I especially don't like the last one.
okay.
So I don't like it when they ruin a series for no reason. Like Harry Potter Part 2.
I don't like when they split the final movie. I don't like when they do that.
Or when they split a movie or a book into
It's
three
three
movies.
giant parts.
Yes. So I thought that it could be filmed kind of differently. It was like very soft and easy to watch. I think it should have been more extreme, or you should look at where they're living in the beginning and feel something just by how they're living. You know, you see Jennifer Lawrence and you're like, well, she's not starving and she's not suffering in this like village. So I didn't think they really sold that very well. That these sections weren't as bad as they really are, because it's in the book it's like North Korea,
Yeah.
but in the movie it's not even that bad. It's like downtown LA.
Aren't they still like shooting people? Like,
I don't know. It just didn't seem that bad, and I'm always against if they don't get like dirt on the face of the star. If she can look that clean the whole movie, I'm always just kind of like, oh, this is not good.
it's probably in her contract. Don't want to get the face
Probably.
dirty.
And I didn't like PETA, the guy who played PETA.
I didn't feel like either of the love interests was great in the films, but I thought Jennifer Lawrence did a great job.
Peter's jaw distracted me.
Yeah.
He's so
His
much
abs
shorter than
distracted
her.
Yeah.
me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I thought I also didn't like I don't like shaky cam.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of shaky.
There's a lot of that.
We never did that.
Well, I think we do it here better than we did it in that they did
There's
it in
been
that
a
movie.
sketch or two of ours that was a little.
Yeah, I think that I first watched that movie and it made me motion sick.
My number 3, or my final choice for our top 3, is the Star Wars prequels.
Sad.
An interesting choice, I know, a
Hear
controversial,
that, Travis?
perhaps.
You hear that, Travis?
And I say this because to me, this is the perfect movie for this kind of list. It is a movie that has excellent bones. There's a good story somewhere in there, and they just need to redo it. Well, obviously Disney won't do a good job at it. I'm just saying if there was some hypothetical world where there was a good filmmaker that was going to do the Star Wars prequels, keep George Lucas 1,000 feet away from the set at all times, lock him in a room, whatever.
Lock Kathleen Kennedy in a room.
Let George. So here's what you need to do. You need to let George Lucas come and do a whiteboard and say, "Here's the general story," and then say, "Thank you so much, Mr. Lucas. We will be seeing you. That's all we need, and they'll send him away.
Get
and
back
then
in your jacket and enter the cell.
get a good writer to write it, get a good director to direct it, get a good cinematographer to shoot it, and keep him away from the set. And I think the prequels just tell a great story, and I would love to see them. I have my doubt. I mean, like I have my suspicions that at some point Disney's going to do this. They'll figure out some way to reboot the prequels, and it's going to be terrible. We'll just say that up front. But if Disney didn't have the rights, if someone else had the rights to do it, I would have loved to see a good take on the prequel trilogy.
I'm just sad in general about the state of Star Wars.
Sure, I agree.
My favorite IP of all time. And
Yeah.
there's a new show out, and I have zero interest in
interest.
watching
No
it.
interest.
Zero interest.
And see, this is why I say prequels versus sequels, because I don't think the sequels need a reboot. I think they were executed well. I just think that it was a bad story. They didn't sit down and coordinate what this trilogy was going to be ahead of time.
Yeah, it's like almost like they didn't plan the scripts.
It's the opposite problem as the prequels to me. So anyway, what is your final selection for the top 3?
Was it me? I thought it was going to Emma.
I think she already did.
No,
her,
I
remember?
did mine.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Okay.
we've been going this way.
So my final selection. Oh, that's right. You're right. Ender's Game.
I almost picked this.
Ender's Game. This is one of those books that you pick up and you cannot put down. And the movie was just an abysmal stain on cinematic history. I remember walking through at Comic-Con, they had like the Ender's Game booth, whatever, outside. And I was walking through, looking around, and I was like, none of this is remotely close to anything that could possibly be good. But I mean, maybe I have my own personal idea of what I want it to look like, and I kind of wanted it to look like an 80s sci-fi movie. How cool would that be if we just today made a retro 80s style sci-fi? And I can't say I'm sure, but obviously written in the 80s, Orson Scott Card probably had that type of imagery in his head, and so why not do it that way?
Yeah.
And also, make it again, but good.
Make it again, but good.
We should get Orson Scott Card on the podcast.
I'd love to have
ask
him
him about that.
He's Bates.
Say, hey, how about you make it again, but good.
Well, greetings, YouTube. Beep bop, beep bop. Our reading show that you must like, subscribe, ring the bell, and comment, or you shall be destroyed. Beep bop, boop, beep bop. Is this thing on? Speak to a person. Destroy Earth. No, speak to a person.